This video is intended to illustrate how to measure common applications such as pumps, motors, and gearboxes for an InproSeal bearing isolator. For measurement guidance on more complex applications such as pillow blocks, steam turbines, or sleeve bearing motors, contact your local InproSeal representative. For demonstration purposes, we are using a sample generic housing featuring elements common to many applications. Before measuring, please have an InproSeal bearing isolator request for quote or RFQ sheet available. You can download and print InproSeal RFQ sheets from our website, or you can use our electronic sheet. Both can be found at www.impro-seal.com. The RFQ sheet provides a guide for the required measurements and a place to record your dimensions. Most equipment can be measured with a dial caliper or a micrometer. Verify that your measured equipment is properly calibrated. The first and most important measurement required for any application is the shaft diameter. This is where the bearing isolator will sit. Carefully measure the diameter of the shaft and record the dimension on your bearing isolator RFQ sheet. Next, measure the distance between the housing face and first outward obstruction. This provides our engineering team with the maximum allowable protrusion from the bearing housing. Quite often, the first outward obstruction is a step in the shaft, as it is here, a keyway, or a coupling. If the first outward obstruction is a step in the shaft that is close to the housing face, we can normally accommodate that with a stepped bearing isolator design. When measuring a step in the shaft, make sure to include the distance from the housing face to the start of the step, any fillet radius if present, and the shaft diameter after the step. Input your dimensions on your RFQ sheet. On many common applications like pumps, motors, and gearboxes, the end cover can be removed. If possible, we recommend doing so to easily obtain the remaining required dimensions. Now we are going to measure the housing bore. This is where the bearing isolator will be pressed in. We recommend measuring the housing bore in multiple locations to verify roundness, making sure it is not egg-shaped or worn. InproSeal bearing isolators normally use an interference or press fit, so if your housing bore is not round, it may require modification. Input the dimension on your RFQ sheet. Measure the housing thickness. This is important to ensure proper positioning of the O-ring on the OD of the bearing isolator. Record the dimension on your RFQ sheet. Next, measure the distance of the housing face to the first inward obstruction. This measurement is critical to understand how far the bearing isolator may insert into the bearing housing and allow sufficient space to provide a lubricant return path to the bearing sump in oil lubricated applications. Quite often, a counterbore where a lip seal was pressed against it is present, as in this case. Depending on the available axial space, this may need to be altered or removed to create room for the bearing isolator and to facilitate proper lubricant return to the sump. If no counterbore is present, as we are showing here, the first inward obstruction is typically the bearing, a lock nut on the bearing, or even a vibration or speed monitor. Record the dimensions on your RFQ sheet. Lastly, if your application is oil lubricated, measure the distance of the oil level from the center shaft line. Typically, the oil should be positioned at the center line of the ball at the bottom position of the housing. If the oil level is above the bottom of the shaft, this would be considered a flooded condition and may require a specific or alternate seal design. Record the dimension on your RFQ sheet. Measuring common applications for an InproSeal bearing isolator is fairly straightforward. Use the bearing isolator RFQ sheet to verify recording all required dimensions. Once all dimensions have been recorded, answer the application detail questions on the bottom half of the sheet as thoroughly as possible before submitting it to your InproSeal representative. This provides our engineering team all the information needed to design the perfect sealing solution for your application and operating environment. For questions, contact your local InproSeal representative or visit www.impro-seal.com.